Good. He yielded some time to me, I hope. Secretary Verga, let me, earlier in a conversation with Commissioner Meisner and Secretary Ryan, I made what I think is an accurate point, which is that a fairly significant fraction of our response to terrorism in all its forms is connected to our concern about Islamist terrorism. Do you share that view? I mean, we keep using the word terrorism as if there's like 6 different flavors and 7 different varieties and so forth. And it seems to me that we're talking about, in terms of what gets us all worked up and seriously frightened, is a singular brand of terrorism.
I think that's a fair statement. The most of the terrorist organizations with global reach could be characterized as Islamic fundamental terrorists. That's a fair statement.
I'm trying to think of it as a terrorist organization that has a global reach. It's not.
With global reach, I'd have to think about it, but I would agree with that. I can't think of one right off the top of my head either.
Well, one of the presumptions that I keep hearing, and all 3 of you are post 9/11 appointees, so you're off the hook, and so you can look back on this with a little more relief and objectivity, I hope. But because it seems to me one of the presumptions that keep surfacing for those of us, and I was in the Senate prior to 9/11. A lot of the work that we did, it seems to me, was inadequate to assess the possibility that the homeland was going to be attacked. And a lot of the presumptions were that simply wasn't a possibility. And we heard Secretary Ryan say, she said to me, we were focused on a potential attack overseas, and yet the evidence over the past 10 years seems to suggest that that wasn't a good presumption. The beginning with the World Trade Center action, and the following with the attack on the CIA, and even the attack on Khobar Towers was against Americans. Unclear exactly at the time who was responsible for it, but certainly the global reach and the possibility that the United States of America could be attacked should have been a front and center concern of everybody that was evaluating that threat.
I think that's fair, but I think the evaluation of the type of attack or scope and scale led to the conclusion or to the view that prevention of that type of activity is primarily law enforcement activity. Since we're talking about internal security matters of the United States, we have, throughout our history, made those matters of civilian concern and not military concern. And so we in the Department of Defense would look to the elimination of terrorist activities overseas as our way of doing that, in the military terminology, defense in depth. You know, that's why we pursue the global war on terrorism, Iraq, Afghanistan, other locations, and turn to the civilian law enforcement agencies to deal with activities inside the United States.
It's actually seeking opinion beyond just the DOD's responsibilities in the matter. But, I mean, even though it was an international event, we sent the FBI over to investigate Khobar. We sent the FBI over to investigate Dar es Salaam and Nairobi. We sent the FBI to investigate the coal as if it was a law enforcement case.
We have throughout history dealt with acts of terrorism as violations of U.S. law. It is the sort of the legalistic burden of proof kind of idea that we had gotten ourselves into prior to 9/11, or even in some cases post 9/11, when you talk about specific acts of terrorism, because I think that's the nature of our society, is to turn to legal remedies short of war.
But the two moments that I think caused us to should have caused us to analyze this threat much differently. The first was East African embassy bombings on the 7th of August that necessitated a significant amount of sophistication. I mean, earlier I made the point that if you look at the details of what these 19 men did on the 11th of September, they defeated every defense that we had in place, every single one of them. I mean, and there is no other word that you can put on it other than they defeated us. They defeated the INS. They defeated the Department of State. They defeated the FAA. They defeated the airlines. Every single turn they defeated. And in part, what the defense seems to be, gee, we thought they were going to hit us over in the Middle East. And it seems to me that both there and, well, let me take the Bojinka plot, which is the other one that I was going to reference. We're going to have the airlines and the FAA in here tomorrow to talk to them. And it seems to me reasonable, and I seek your educated opinion on this, not necessarily your DOD opinion, but it seems to me at the very least we should have been prepared for a multiple hijacking event. And we were not prepared for a multiple hijacking event. Once again, we said, well, gee, we didn't think that was going to happen. And at some point, you run out of patience for people to say, I didn't think that was going to happen, when we were defeated so clearly in areas where we shouldn't have been defeated.
I can't disagree that they defeated any defenses that we had in place, and that those defenses were, by evidence, inadequate. I think what we have to do is to look at what we're doing today, look at what we're going to do in the future in order to learn from that mistake and not let it happen again.
But would you, I mean, you've got combat experience. You put a perimeter out, and guy falls asleep at night and says, well, we haven't been attacked for months and months and months. Why should we worry about it any longer? That's not an excuse you would accept if you went out and found somebody out on the perimeter that's providing security asleep. And yes, that's the defense. There hadn't been a hijacking in 10 years. Thus, we didn't really have to worry about it any longer. I mean, am I thinking in a way that would be consistent with the way you would evaluate this?
No, clearly we should have, and clearly we didn't. But, you know, it's retrospectively, that's an easy conclusion to come to. I think based on the information people had available at the time, they came to a different conclusion. And, you know, I would not be in a position, I was not in a position to make those judgments myself, and would hesitate to second-guess someone. You make a judgment based on the best information you have available at the time, based on your experience and the information that's brought to you. Sometimes you come to the right conclusion, and sometimes you come to the wrong conclusion.
But it seems to me that I mean, I appreciate hesitating to second-guess, but if I put somebody in charge of security, and if I put somebody in charge of INS and say, keep us safe, if I put somebody in charge of the consular office, if I put somebody in charge of the FAA and the airlines, and they say, whoops, I was looking someplace else, but I can be sympathetic all I want to, but at some point I need to say, hey, you're responsible for this, and it doesn't work any longer to say, well, gee, you didn't give me the intelligence, you know, I was sitting there waiting for it, I didn't realize. I mean, it's what Secretary Lehman was saying earlier. I mean, everybody knew after Dar es Salaam and Nairobi that we were up against an extremely sophisticated operation, that the stuff that we were using after World Trade Center 1, which was, these guys aren't very sophisticated, thank God we've got people out there that are trying to return get their deposit back in the Ryder truck, all the stuff, the disparaging evaluations that were being done at the time. It was clear that that was no longer going to work. And I'm going to ask Mr. Bonner, I'm going to take you off the hook here, Secretary. I'm going to ask Commissioner Bonner. Earlier we had, and I promised, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be brief on this one. Earlier we had a presentation of, it went by very quickly, of documents that these conspirators, these hijackers used. And it was put out there, the staff was making a case, and I think a very effective case, that the idea that they just all came in legally and they're all clean and nothing could have been done about it, that's a false idea. There was manipulation of documents, and there was also some mistakes that were made on our side. And one of them had to do with Mohammed Atta. And I'm going to try to, on my own, stick this thing up so you can see it. Can you see that from where you're sitting?
Yeah, I can see it pretty well.
There we go. Yeah. Well, you can sit where you are. You don't. Well, maybe you have to come over and look at it. I mean, Well, what you have here is a visa and then a secondary evaluation that was done, and the question is whether, I mean, basically what happened here in the case of Muhammad Atta, you've got somebody says I'm coming to the United States under one kind of a visa, while the secondary evaluation clearly identifies that that's not true, that he's in a flight school, that he's applying for a change of status, and the question is whether or not I don't know what you call him any longer, the single-faced person that's INS and Customs.
Those Customs and Border Protection officers or inspectors.
Do they still have the discretion to make this kind of judgment?
Yeah, they do, but the discretion is pursuant to guidance that I've issued, and that is that if there is after a questioning of the person, we have a right to question everybody that's coming into the United States. And after questioning, if there's a concern about that person for a terrorist threat, and there's a basis, and there's almost always a basis for a non-immigrant, that person is excluded from the U.S. That's what Inspector Melendez did, by the way. He did his job right. But so yes, of course we could do this, and of course Muhammad Atta should have been excluded from the United States. But, you know, in the beauty of hindsight and that sort of thing, I don't want to be, actually this was handled by INS inspectors at the time. Commissioner Ziegler has just alluded to the kind of pressures that were put on the INS from Congress and others to just let people in. But those days are over. I'll tell you that right now. We've issued the directions that you've got somebody coming in, and he was not entitled to come in because he was coming in, he was changing his status. He had left the United States. He was not entitled to come back in the United States. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying that if there was a concern in anybody's mind
how do you
in
know
immigration secondary.
I'm very impressed with the confidence that you're using here, but Khalid Sheikh Mohammed used an alias and got in. You're saying that can't be done today? I couldn't put an alias in?
Well, I think it's a lot more difficult to get, if you're talking about using an alias.
Wait a minute. If I could use your own words, you said a lot more difficult. That's a lot different than the absolute certainty that you were using.
No, there is no foolproof system. I'm just saying, look, of course you use we should, first of all, I would say you would want to, you would ask some questions of Muhammad Atta. We obviously, you know, this is in hindsight, this is after 9/11, but we have instituted as part of CBP's procedures that somebody that is, by the way, identified as potential, could be a potential threat to the United States, is going to go to get some questions. Very often that's going to be in secondary. If you have some concerns about them and then they should be, and they can be excluded from the United States, that should be done.
But what is
in this instance, he was not entitled, by the way.
What is this? Tell me what this phrase "with hindsight" mean. What is that all about? I mean, you know, if you put me in charge of something, I make a mistake, can I come and say, "Yo, sure, with hindsight"? You're going to come in here and tell me I did something wrong?
I'm not excusing or condoning anything, Senator. I want you to understand that. I'm just saying, you know, there is some hindsight that's applied here, and we ought to learn from it. We ought to improve what we do, and we have. And I'd be happy to tell you how we've done it.
Well, the narrative that concerns me, besides, Mr. Commissioner, has nothing to do with you, but any of you three gentlemen. It has to do with, at moments in time, and the watershed for me was 7 August 98. At moments in time when we should have known that we were at considerable risk to Islamist extremists, you didn't get a presidential directive driving it down. At a moment in time when the coal was clearly, sometime in 01, early in 01, the information came and said we were absolutely certain that the coal attack was done by Al-Qaeda. Islamist extremist terrorists. I mean, I know it may not be politically correct, but that's where it comes from. And you know, you earlier, in response to Commissioner Benveniste's questioning, it was remarkable. I mean, you said, you know, we could figure out who the 19 were in 45 minutes. I mean, that's a shocking thing to hear, because it basically says that there were simple ways to have prevented this from happening, and we didn't do it.
Knowing too, I mean, that's a very important fact that we knew.
All right, so what's it take? I run the manifest against the lookout, and the planes don't take off.
Absolutely. Well, and so, and the question would be, are you doing that? You bet. Now, if you want me to comment on something that was done, look, it was wrong. First of all, this was,
but didn't you answer
even under the INS regulations at the time, the Atta was not admissible in the United States because he had left the country and he was seeking to change status. And once you leave the country, you're not entitled to come back in. So he shouldn't have been let back in. And let me just stop there. He shouldn't have been let in.
Have you been in Crossfire before? Because you're very good at this, you know. But
Not Crossfire, but similar.
But you did say it's in front of 12 men and women and a jury. Is that what it is? Did you say though in the answer in the affirmative that INS agents have the discretion today to when there's a contradiction in status such as this?
No, look, if no, in that situation, no, there is no discretion, because this person could not be admitted because he was out of status. What I'm saying is, in the area, really what I should have clarified is, in the area where there is discretion to parole somebody in or admit somebody in, that the guidance to the field, and this is all of the legacy immigration inspectors, legacy customs inspectors, the guidance is that essentially, if there is any concern about somebody posing a potential terrorist threat, you exercise discretion to exclude that person from the United States. So I'm not saying there's discretion in this case, because I believe that's still the law and the regulation is that if you're out of status, you cannot be admitted back in. Senator, I don't want to overstate things either. I actually almost want to go back and see what the discretion would be in this situation. That is to say, where somebody were out of status, because I believe that there ought to be some discretion here. I don't think we mindlessly apply laws and regulations, so that if this person that was out of status and had applied for a change of status, I don't know, is the proverbial 68-year-old grandmother who doesn't fit any targeting criteria for a terrorist, and we're satisfied that person isn't a terrorist. I don't want to mindlessly exercise, some rule that just doesn't make any sense. What we're trying to do is to have it clear to all the men and women on the front line what we're trying to do here, and that is our job. As I stated in my testimony, our priority mission is preventing terrorists and terrorist weapons from entering the United States. So our job is to use our questioning skills, those skills that Inspector Melendez has back here, to use those skills and make a determination. And then, if you're concerned about somebody, you're darn right to exclude them from the country by expedited removal. And that's what we do. So I frankly, with respect to, would we in 100% of the cases, in all circumstances, not exercise any discretion here? I actually don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I'll get you the answer. But I believe we ought to have some discretion. I just think it ought to be guided in a principled way toward essentially the priority mission of Homeland Security, and that's keeping terrorists out.